Did you know that in biblical times, the Jews themselves looked down on the Galileans? This may sound strange, since they were all part of the same people of Israel. But the truth is that the Galileans carried a difficult mark. They were seen as ordinary people, with a different way of speaking, with less rigid customs, and often considered second class compared to the Jews of Judea. And it is precisely in this scenario that something surprising happens. It was in Galilee, a region little valued and even ridiculed, that God decided to reveal something extraordinary: the coming of the Messiah. While Jerusalem was the religious and political center, Galilee, so rejected, was chosen as the stage for one of the greatest manifestations in history. In this video, you will discover who the Galileans really were in the Bible, understand why they suffered so much prejudice, and learn how this reality reveals the action of God. You will realize that the Lord transforms exactly what is rejected into an instrument of honor. Galilee was located in the north of Israel, a region surrounded by mountains and with fertile valleys. At its heart was the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Gennesaret or the Lake of Tiberias, a source of life for the neighboring villages. Its waters were rich in fish, which made cities like Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Tiberias grow around it, becoming centers of trade and gathering. In addition, the land was productive, with vineyards, olive groves, wheat and barley plantations that supported many families. This combination of fertile soil and abundant lake made Galilee a prosperous region, capable of feeding multitudes. Galilee stood out not only for its fertile land and abundant fishing, it was also a meeting point of different cultures. Its roads connected Egypt to the north of Syria and to Mesopotamia, which made the region a busy route. Over time, many peoples passed through there, first the Greeks, then the Syrians, and later the Romans. Each left their mark, the Greeks with their culture, and the Romans with their political and military power. This mixture, however, aroused suspicion in Jerusalem. The Jews of Judea, who saw themselves as guardians of the purity of faith and the law, looked at the Galileans as people contaminated by so much coexistence with foreigners. Since they had less rigid customs and lived surrounded by other peoples, they were considered less faithful to traditions. For many in Jerusalem, the Galileans were seen as second-class Jews, poorly prepared and less spiritual. Even so, the Galileans had a strong connection with their land and with the heritage of Israel. Their faith was simple, but alive. They worked in fishing, farming, and community life, always keeping alive the hope of the coming of the Messiah. While the religious leaders of Judea were bound to the rules and rituals of the temple, the Galileans lived a practical and sincere spirituality, tied to daily life. And it is exactly there that God's plan appears. It was in this rejected region that Jesus grew up and spent most of his life. There he also began his ministry, proving that God is not guided by human prejudice, but chooses the humble and those of sincere heart to carry out his work. Galilee, with its lake full of fish, productive lands, and a people often despised, was precisely the place where the light of Christ shone in a special way. What the world rejected, God used to change history, breaking cultural and spiritual barriers. The people there lived a simple life marked by hard work. The region was located in the north of Israel, known for the Sea of Galilee and for its fertile fields, but surviving there required daily effort. Fishing was one of the main activities. Many men spent entire nights casting nets, facing strong winds and unexpected storms. This routine created resilient people with calloused hands and full of courage who learned to depend on God for their daily bread. It is no coincidence that several disciples of Jesus were fishermen from there. Peter, Andrew, James, and John grew up in this simple yet challenging environment. In addition to fishing, there were also farmers who planted wheat, barley, grapes, and olives. It was work that required patience, since it depended on the rains and on daily care for the land. There were also artisans who worked with wood, stone, or fabrics and helped move the local economy. Galilee did not have the luxury of Judea, nor the prestige of Jerusalem, but its people were known for their strength, dedication, and for living a practical faith in the midst of so many struggles. Even so, the Galileans were often the target of prejudice. Many Jews from Jerusalem saw them as people who were too simple, rude, and uneducated, incapable of living up to the purity of religion that they valued so much. The way Galileans spoke was easy to recognize, full of expressions unique to the region, which made them different from the other Jews. This often served as a reason for prejudice, yet they had a striking characteristic. They were courageous and determined. Accustomed to dealing with the harshness of life, they did not give up easily. That is why they were ready to embrace new causes and follow someone in whom they truly believed. Not by chance, Jesus chose to begin his ministry precisely in Galilee. He did not look for followers among the religious leaders of the capital, but found in fishermen and simple workers hearts willing to believe and obey. This despised people revealed the contrast between the simplicity of common life and the greatness of God's plans. In human eyes, they were considered inferior, but it was among them that the message of the kingdom began to spread. What seemed like weakness, God transformed into strength, showing that he does not choose according to human criteria, but equips those he calls to reveal his glory through what the world rejects. Even though they were part of Israel, the Galileans carried a stigma within the very nation. The Jews of Judea, especially those from Jerusalem, saw them as brothers of lesser spiritual value. This prejudice came not only from pride, but also from old internal divisions, and from the constant influence of foreign peoples over the region of Galilee. While Jerusalem was the political, economic, and religious center, Galilee was on a trade route, always receiving merchants and conquerors. This caused many from the south to see the Galileans as less pure and less faithful to the law of Moses. The religious leaders of Jerusalem, such as the Pharisees and teachers of the law, saw the Galileans as ignorant of the scriptures. For them, the simple life of those people was enough to question their faith. They called them uncultured, distant from the customs and careful traditions of the temple. They said that they did not strictly follow the oral traditions nor the detailed rules of ceremonial law. This speech served as an excuse to reinforce even more the contempt against the Galileans in the eyes of the people. A clear example of this prejudice is found in John chapter 7, verse 52. When Nicodemus tried to defend Jesus, the Pharisees responded sarcastically, "From Galilee can the Christ come?" This question revealed the contempt they had for the region. In their view, nothing important or grand could come from Galilee. They believed that a place so marked by the presence of foreigners could never be the birthplace of a prophet, much less of the promised Messiah. This kind of prejudice appears in other moments of the Bible. In Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, when the disciples spoke in several tongues through the Holy Spirit, some mocked, saying, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans?" Acts chapter 2, verse 7. The idea was simple. If they were Galileans, they could not possibly have knowledge or wisdom. Even their way of speaking gave them away. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 73, Peter was recognized only by his accent, which shows how this regional mark often served as a reason for contempt and ridicule. What the religious leaders did not understand is that God does not follow human criteria. Those who were called simple or incapable were precisely the ones chosen by him to change the world. It was in Galilee that Jesus spent his childhood. It was there that he called most of his disciples, and it was in that despised region that the gospel began to spread with power. The place rejected by men became the stage of God's revelation. This prejudice against the Galileans clearly shows the difference between God's vision and people's vision. While man looks at appearance, at accent, or at origin, God sees the heart. And in Galilee there were humble, hard-working, and believing hearts that became witnesses of the greatest event in history, the coming of the Messiah. It was among them that Jesus chose his first disciples. By the Sea of Galilee, ordinary men fought for their daily sustenance. Peter and Andrew were casting their nets when they were called. Shortly after, James and John, sons of Zebedee, also fishermen, heard the same invitation. They were not teachers of the law nor respected leaders in Jerusalem. They were simple workers, accustomed to the cold of the dawn, to sudden storms, and to the toil of fishing. And it was to these men that Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. The choice of Jesus was not by chance. What the leaders of Judea saw as weakness, God saw as humility and willingness to learn. The Galileans were known for their hard work and for the prejudice they faced, but it was exactly from this rejected people that God raised instruments to transform the world. Some cities of Galilee gained eternal prominence in the pages of the Bible. Capernaum, for example, became the center of many of the works of Jesus. It was there that he healed the servant of a Roman centurion, Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 13, showing that his message had no barriers of race or religion. In Capernaum, Jesus also expelled demons, healed paralytics, and preached in the synagogues about the kingdom of God. The city became known as the base of the ministry of Christ, revealing that the Son of God chose precisely the despised north of Israel to manifest his glory. Another important city was Nazareth, the place where Jesus grew up. It was so small and without prestige that Nathanael even asked, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" John chapter 1, verse 46. But it was exactly from this simple village, with stone houses and narrow streets, that came the one who would change the destiny of all humanity. It was in Nazareth that the Messiah spent his childhood and youth until the moment of beginning his mission. We must also not forget Cana of Galilee, where the first miracle of Jesus took place, the transformation of water into wine during a wedding feast, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. This sign not only brought joy to the bride and groom and the guests, but also revealed his divine authority before the disciples. It was only the beginning of many miracles performed in Galilean land, proving that God chose precisely that despised region to show his glory to the world. It was also in Galilee that Jesus taught some of the most remarkable messages of his entire ministry. The famous Sermon on the Mount, recorded in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, took place on a hillside of the region and gathered a great multitude in search of hope. There he spoke about the Beatitudes, taught about forgiveness, love for one's neighbor, trust in God, and showed how to live according to the values of the kingdom of heaven. Thus, Galilee was not only the setting of miracles, but also the place where Jesus revealed in words and actions the heart of the Father to all humanity. This contrast is striking. While the religious leaders of Jerusalem looked at the Galileans with contempt, calling them ignorant and impure, it was precisely there that God decided to begin the work of the gospel. Ordinary cities such as Capernaum, Nazareth, and Cana, once of no importance to the religious elite, became eternal symbols of faith. What seemed weak, God turned into strength. What seemed worthless, he honored. What was small in human eyes, the Lord used to begin his eternal plan. The story of the Galileans brings us a powerful lesson. God does not look at appearance, social position, or religious prestige. He chooses precisely those whom the world despises to show his greatness. That is why Jesus called fishermen, farmers, and simple artisans to follow him. The kingdom of God does not rely on human status, but on hearts willing to obey and trust. It was in Galilee, a land marked by prejudice and contempt, that the greatest movement in history was born, and from there the message of Christ began to reach all nations. The Galileans were treated as second-class people in Israel. Their way of speaking revealed their origin. Their customs were different, and living among foreigners caused the Jews of Judea to look at them with suspicion. In Jerusalem, where they considered themselves guardians of the faith, the Galileans were seen as ignorant, poorly prepared, and spiritually inferior. This stigma weighed on their lives, marking them with rejection and exclusion. But it was precisely in this scenario of contempt that the grace of God was revealed. Jesus did not begin his ministry in Jerusalem, the religious capital, nor did he seek the powerful or the learned. On the contrary, it was in Galilee that the light began to shine. Among fishermen, farmers, and artisans, he called his first disciples. And it was in this simple place, considered insignificant, that great miracles happened. The blind came to see, the paralyzed walked again, and even the dead were raised. What men rejected, God chose to exalt. This choice makes it clear that God does not look at status, appearance, or social position. For men, the Galileans had no value. For God, they were instruments ready to proclaim the gospel. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, ordinary men with the marked accent of Galilee, were raised up as pillars of the church. And Jesus himself, called the Nazarene, an expression often used with contempt, transformed that name into a symbol of eternal honor. This contrast shows a powerful truth that never changes. The grace of God does not depend on social position, wealth, or human recognition. For the Lord, titles, palaces, or applause do not define value. What the world rejects, he accepts. What seems weak, he strengthens. And what appears insignificant, he transforms into an instrument of honor. It is in this apparent paradox that the greatness of God is revealed. It was in this way that Galilee, a region seen as simple and without prominence compared to the great cities of Israel, became the chosen place for the greatest revelation in history. While many expected the Messiah to come from Jerusalem, surrounded by prestige and religious pomp, God chose the opposite path. He willed that the beginning of the good news would be marked by humility, so that no one could say it was the result of human strength, but would recognize that it was the exclusive work of the sovereignty and infinite love of God. The Galileans, once the target of prejudice and mockery, became living proof that the Lord is not impressed by appearances, nor does he follow human expectations. He looks at the heart, where faith, sincerity, and willingness to obey are found. Their story teaches that rejection and contempt from people cannot stop divine plans. On the contrary, God chooses precisely what seems small to show that power and glory belong to him alone. What began in contempt ended in honor. From that land marked by rejection came the light of the gospel, which changed the world forever. From Galilee came the message that crossed centuries, reached nations, and continues to transform lives even today. The great lesson we take from this story is clear. True greatness is not in expensive clothes, in important titles, or in a position of prestige before people. These are values imposed by the world, but before God they mean nothing. For the Lord, what truly matters is a humble heart, willing to listen, obey, and trust in him. It is in this broken heart that the presence of God finds room to act and transform. When we look at the Galileans, we see exactly that. They had no fame, were not known as wise men, and did not have access to the privileges of the religious elite of Jerusalem. They were simple workers, accustomed to the sweat of fishing, the toil of farming, and the rhythm of ordinary life. They were people whom society considered small, but it was precisely upon them that the light of the gospel shone. This shows us in an undeniable way that the grace of the Lord is sovereign. It is not bound by labels created by men, it does not respect social barriers, and it is not limited by the rules of the world. God does not look at appearance, but at the heart. And the message is direct. If God was able to use a people despised, mocked, and rejected to bring to the world the greatest news in history, the coming of the Messiah, then he can also use any person willing to open their heart to his will. It does not matter the origin, the financial condition, or the level of knowledge. What matters is sincere surrender. This is the beauty of grace. It is universal. It does not distinguish between rich and poor, educated or simple. It reaches everyone without exception and has the power to transform even those who seem unlikely in human eyes into living witnesses of the greatness of God. The story of the Galileans is, therefore, a powerful reminder that the Lord chooses precisely what the world despises to show the strength of his love. What seemed weak he made strong. What was seen as worthless he exalted. And the same continues to happen even today. God transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary instruments for his glory. Now I want to know from you, did you already know the story of the Galileans in the Bible? Write it down in the comments. Share this teaching with other people. Leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next content. May God greatly bless your life, and may you remain firm in the presence of the Lord.